Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 3 of Quill and Hammer Reforging Fiction. I'm Trevor.
And I'm Zach. What's going on, everybody?
So let's just jump right in, Zach. The last two episodes have been about how we would fix, or maybe not fix, but improve episodes 1 and episodes 2 of Star Wars. Specifically, last week we were talking about how we would improve on Attack of the Clones and give a bit of context to round out the story and make it a bit more um what's the word, Zeke? Bit more rounded out,
Fleshed out.
fleshed out. So we for a quick recap, some of the highlights were we really thought if you made Anakin look like a Jedi, spend a bit more time doing good and show that side of things for like why Padme would have fallen in love with him. That would have been interesting and done a better job than he just kind of seems like a brooding teenager, a bit whiny. Um, and then we thought if you uh, introduce General Grievous a little bit earlier so that he doesn't just come out of the blue in Revenge of the Sith, and then some manipulation on Palpatine's part to get uh, things rolling, and you can kind of see what he did, what Dooku did behind the scenes to kind of manipulate everyone and um, get the Clone Wars actually started. Am I missing anything, Zeke, that you can think of?
No, I think that's it. So why don't we just jump right off right there? Assuming that we introduced Grievous in episode two, where would you take that in the beginning of episode three?
So I don't necessarily mind having that opening scene in the movie, the one where Grievous goes in and kidnaps the Chancellor and then is flying out. I would like to I would put more stuff before that. Add in some context, a little bit more of how the war is going, um, before we even get to Chancellor Palpatine being kidnapped. I would like to see more with General Grievous though, because to be honest, in the show, in the movie, he's supposed to be this, fantastic warrior and a genius, and there's a reason he is there as the general. But you kind of don't really see any of that.
Right.
All we see is he traps Anakin and Obi-Wan, and then he gloats a little bit, and then he runs away. And then um, the next thing you see is the fight with him and Obi-Wan.
Right.
And so I would like more. I would like maybe, how he I don't know, I would like to see him actually kill a Jedi. Is that is that morbid of me? Like I would want to see him do something because he's got all these lightsabers. How
Right.
did he get them? And how did he get so good? Maybe show him and Dooku sparring a little bit so you can see that he actually is a really skilled opponent. And then you've got Obi-Wan who comes in and he's this master of the defensive lightsaber form. And he just not manipulates him, but takes it apart and is able to deal with everything because he's just the master of the defensive lightsaber form.
It's interesting that you mention having Grievous kill a Jedi because in the deleted scenes, that opening sequence included Grievous killing Shakti. For whatever reason, George Lucas decided to cut that out, whether it didn't flow with the pacing of that opening sequence or whatever. But no, I agree with you. I think showing his prowess in battle Um, I think a common theme as we've been talking about the prequels, these last three episodes, is the villains. They don't. They're how do I want to say it? The threat of the villains isn't as palpable as it could be. We're meant to infer that Darth Maul is this ruthless killer. We're meant to infer that General Grievous is this masterful warrior, but we never actually see those things, right?
Right.
And so if we were to take these movies like we have been and putting them in this hypothetical Lord of the Rings style extended edition, that's something that I think would make General Grievous a lot more of a threat is, like we said, introduce him in Attack of the Clones, but really show his prowess, show him taking down one or two Jedi Masters at once. And like you said, show how he got some of those lightsaber trophies that he gloats about when he captures Anakin and Obi-Wan.
Right. And I was thinking while you were saying that something we don't see at all in the prequels is that ruthlessness that Darth Vader had when it came to his own subordinates. And I guess
Yes.
it's hard because most of the army and, they're droids. It's a droid army and you don't see that. But like, two or three times in uh, the original trilogy, Darth Vader kills someone and appoints the next person up. And it's like,
Hmm.
you know, you failed me for the last time. And then he force chokes him to death and then, you know, moves on. But we don't see any of that. I don't know. Do
Right.
we see uh, Palpatine or Dooku? Well, besides the fight at the end of Revenge of the Sith with Palpatine, I don't know if we see much killing or much ruthlessness other than that, right?
No, the big ruthlessness scene is when Anakin during during Order 66 slaughters the younglings and then goes to Mustafar and slaughters the remnants of the Trade Federation and the separatists.
Right.
But but that's kind of the climax of the film. And so before that, you don't, like you said, you don't really get anything. And so it would be interesting, I think, to see um, Palpatine himself before everything happens with Mace Windu, before Anakin becomes Darth Vader, to show him being ruthless. And, one of the things we were talking about in the past episode was showing some of Palpatine's manipulation. And I think a way to tackle both of those things is to show him in private negotiations with the Trade Federation or certain planets, certain representatives of the Republic, and have him do something similar to that. His thing is Force Lightning, so maybe he Force Lightnings somebody to death and appoints the next guy and says, "Yeah, you better do what I want." You know what I mean? Some intimidation tactics, I think, would be nice to see.
Right. Now here's my question. How many people do you think are in Palpatine's inner circle enough to know that he's actually the Sith Lord? Does that
The
does that change things, or would you just have one of his guard? He would be like, "Hey, it's time to do something I want you to do. You're gonna do it." And they kind of said, "Well, we're not gonna do that." And then does he make a motion and his guard stabs him in the back? Or like how is he trying to keep that secret, or is he?
you do make a good point. I in my head, there's that blue skinned alien that has the two big horns. He's the one that, you know, we shall have order in the Senate, right?
Right.
I think he's about the only one that knows that Palpatine is the Sith Lord. I
Yeah.
think he's the only one that's in his pocket. Um, so I would probably go ahead with your idea of having you know, having his guards stab the senators in the back if they don't do what he wants. That seems like a way to show his ruthlessness without giving up the game that he's actually the Sith Lord.
Right. So that is one thing that has been the theme behind all of our discussions is we would like to see Palpatine step into that manipulator role, be the ruthless guy that is, putting on the concerned not generally, I meant elderly kind of grandfather figure who is doing his best for the galaxy and
Mm-hmm.
appearing like he is, this benevolent man, but behind the scenes being that ruthless manipulator, orchestrating things, causing people's death. And you can do that by him being both Palpatine and Darth Sidious. You could see more communication between Sidious and gosh, it's like I've got a list. Sidious and Dooku, and he can, coordinate there. Or I mean, think about this. Order 66. That implies that there are at least 65 other orders,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
So, like, maybe a couple of those. Like, he has these pre-planned things, or he can program things that send it to the chip in the clone's brains, right?
Right.
And he's the only one that can program those things in, but he caught, Order 35, and he manipulates things that way. I think that would be kind of interesting, maybe. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. Just something, anything to show the ruthless and the manipulation that he's capable of. And, I think we've talked about a couple of different avenues that could be taken to show that. And at the end of the day, I think any of them are good enough. It just you need to see more Darth Sidious in Palpatine.
Right. And to illustrate that fact more, I would like to see more of Dooku being that ruthless guy because I mean, you and I have watched all of the Clone Wars. We can see him doing things and being the ruthless Sith and all of that. But what we don't see is that context in the movies, and that's the point. And so I would like that opening scene of the movie to be, 30 or 40% into the film,
Right,
and you have 40 or 30 to 40% of the movie is more context. You see more of Sidious causing manipulations, but you see Dooku manipulating his way and getting into Coruscant with Grievous, and they come together and you can see, like we said earlier, see them fighting, see them training a little bit. Uh, see, I mean, we talked about this. How does Grievous become Grievous?
right.
Because he's a humanoid, but in droid form now, and he's got the organs as we see with Obi-Wan killing him, but
He's become this cyborg.
right. So how does that happen? And you know, more of that context would be very helpful. And something that we talked about earlier would be we want more context with Anakin and Obi-Wan because really they're only together in that opening scene and then they're apart until they're enemies.
Right.
So like what would you think would, what could they do together that would balance that out?
Well, I think in my mind, you take your concept of making, Grievous and Dooku have more context there, flesh that out more, and have the chase to get them. with Obi-Wan and Anakin together for longer. Show them being brothers. The famous line, at least in my mind, at the end of the movie is Obi-Wan saying, "You were my brother, Anakin, and I loved you."
You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you.
But in Attack of the Clones, we see Obi-Wan being more like an annoyed father figure to Anakin. And then, sure, he's proud, at the end of that sequence where they get back to Coruscant and he tells Anakin that he did great, but then we don't really see much else, like you said. And so I would want to see them fighting together side by side, taking down more droids, fighting against Grievous, kind of like what I imagine is more of like Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon together, but with two equal Jedi Knights, Obi-Wan and Anakin, fighting 2-on-1 against Grievous or against Dooku more. Because even in the fight against Dooku, Obi-Wan's out pretty early on. And I get the point of that is to show that Anakin has grown, to show that he has become more powerful, to set up the idea that he can be Darth Vader, and also to see the manipulation, that subtle manipulation that Palpatine throws in there, to get Anakin to kill Dooku. But I want to see more interaction between Obi-Wan and Anakin. Um, and I think that will make the final battle between the two of them a more satisfying emotional payoff.
I agree. And I think going back to the context, like I feel like part of it should be they are like you could show them being on a mission together and then
Mhm.
they are on their, they finish this amazing thing and they do something really incredible. Who I don't know what that is, but and then they're coming back to Coruscant and then you have all of this drama going on. And so they get there and they hear, Palpatine is or Grievous and Dooku have kidnapped the Chancellor, or maybe not kidnapping it, but they're storming the Senate building.
Mhm.
And so they rush over there, and then you have this fight from there until they get up into the ship, and it's kind of like they get there just as you drag away Palpatine and put him into a shuttle, and they fly away. And so then they have to hurry and find their own ships, get up there, make it a little bit more urgent rather than starting with them all in space.
Right. I I think that would be a lot more effective at, and like you said, you give context to Obi-Wan and Anakin, and it makes it more urgent, because you don't really understand what's going on until they're already in the ship. And it's like, oh yeah, Palpatine should be in here somewhere, but the focus of the initial opening sequence is to show them in their starfighters, which is cool. I'm not going to say it's not, but you kind of don't really know what's going on until you get into Grievous's ship.
Right.
So the context would be, I think it would be a lot more helpful.
So I'm gonna branch a little bit. This isn't something that you and I talked about, but it's something that I just remembered that kind of always bothered me is you know how they get home. They're not they get home, they are just getting out of that shuttle and Obi-Wan is gonna go report to the council and Anakin's gonna be the, poster boy or whatever. And then Padme is there and she is telling him that she's pregnant.
Hmm.
Well, like in my mind, you have a baby, Zach. She's 4 years old, but
Right.
you've been through that process. I have not. But like, that's not a surprise process, right? Like, they are pregnant, they grow, their belly gets bigger, and then towards, it's a 9 month process,
Right.
I guess is my point. So did they not see each other for 9 months?
You know, and I think that's another problem that needs to be resolved or needs to be clarified with Revenge of the Sith is how long are these periods of time? At what stage is she when she tells Anakin? Because you begin, she's not even really excuse me, she's not even really showing in that scene. And then by the end of the movie, she's giving birth. If I'm just bringing in, my year and a half of medical knowledge, 26 weeks is about the stage where a baby is viable. Before that, you're pushing your luck. And even at that stage, there's going to be problems. They're going to be in the ICU for weeks, right? Um, so for Luke and Leia to survive, she would have had to been 26 weeks along. You know that you're pregnant after 5 weeks from your last cycle. So I mean, there's 22 weeks between when Padme would have known and when the babies would have been viable, potentially longer. Like you said, it's a 9 month process, right? So my question, and I've tried looking this up online to see what people think about how long or what how long do the events of Revenge of the Sith take? Some people think it's 5 days, a week. Some people say it's months. So it's really kind of up for debate. Now, to answer your question a little more directly, we know that the war has been going on for 3 years at this point, right? I think the most likely scenario is that Anakin has been out fighting on, the outer rim worlds for the past, let's say, 2 months. And that's about how far along Padme would be. 2.5 months, right? So she's waiting for him to get home before she tells him. And then she drops this news. But then you still have 5.5 months before you get to a point where the babies would actually be viable. You know what I mean? So how do you think, or what do you think would be the most effective way to actually show this passage of time?
Like I feel like you need, I mean, think of playing any of the video games we like. You have night and day cycles, and even if that's, you know, like in Horizon Zero Dawn where you sit at the fire and then it goes back and forth, right? Or is that the
Mhm.
right film I'm thinking of? It doesn't matter, but the point is you need some mention of time. There isn't anything like that. You could have another mission in there. Remember how Obi-Wan goes on this, you know, detective journey? Why
Right,
why don't Anakin and Obi-Wan go on this detective journey in between the battle where they save the Chancellor and kill Dooku and being split up and finding Grievous?
right. And I think, excuse me, a lot of the context that we're missing would be solved by throwing in an extra mission. Put Anakin and Obi-Wan together, send them on a mission, and you have opportunities to show ruthlessness from the villains. You have opportunities to show the camaraderie between Obi-Wan and Anakin, and then you show the passage of time. And a lot of the muddied waters become clear if you just add something like that.
Right.
Now, another question that you and I talked about in between our two episodes here was why or what is leading Mace Windu to not trust Anakin? You hear him say, I don't trust the boy, or whatever variation of that it is. Mace Windu is second in command in the Jedi Order. He's not an idiot. He should be able to have foresight and wisdom, even if things are being muddied and clouded by the dark side. He should be able to at least think straight. So why, in your mind, does he not trust Anakin, and how do you show that in the film?
Well, see, I'm not 100% sure how to do it, but like, I feel like the core of it falls into two categories. You need to show more interaction with Anakin and all of the council, or I don't know how it's like the Clone Wars. We see the Clone Wars and we can see how the war changes Anakin
Mhm.
through that animated series. And all of that 3 year context is missing from Revenge of the Sith. So
Right.
you need something to bridge that gap. And you can say, you know, I mean, just simply having like, what do you mean? And then you can say, I don't know. I don't know if flashbacks or Mace Windu just saying, well, he did this on
Right.
Tatooine, or he did this over here, and and like things that they know about that happens, but also the the I mean, I feel like at least Obi-Wan isn't an idiot. He knows that there's something going on between Padme and Anakin.
Right.
And, you know, do you think the council sees a little bit of that, or maybe not sees that specific part, that that's what it is, but they can see that he is hiding something?
Well, you do have that confession scene, or that scene where Anakin is seeking counsel from Yoda, where he's had the visions of, or the dreams of Padme dying, and he's worried about it. He goes to Yoda and he confesses that there's somebody close to him that he's afraid to lose. So I think I think you should be able to justify that the council knows something is up. But I think, like you said, even just having Mace Windu voice some of those things in that conversation, and that's a 30-second fix that would at least flesh some of these things out. Cast some doubt on Anakin in an actual logical manner.
Right. Because that is something that we do miss. Why is it that they don't explain? I mean, think of the scene where Palpatine appoints Anakin to be on the council, and then they kind of are just acting cold towards Anakin. They could have said, "Hey, listen, we're going to put you on the council. We think you're going to be here one day." You know, they could say these things. We really trust you. We don't like that the emperor is forcing our hand here, but we're fine doing this. We just want to continue with the normal process of you becoming a master, and that takes a few years. A
Right.
little bit of communication and context would have really opened up the way to say, hey, this isn't you. But instead, they're just really cold. They're, like, it's like they've already condemned Anakin for being appointed by the chancellor. Like, they have been like, hey, you're in cahoots with him already.
Right.
So, but a little bit of that, like, we don't trust this, or, I mean, not that you can necessarily say, Anakin, and maybe they could. Maybe Palpatine could say, listen, or not listen, but like, there was this and this and this, and we can't make you a master because of this. And he can still be as cold as Mace Windu was and just be logical and say, like, you did this in wherever, and you did this in wherever, and you did this, and we don't trust Palpatine, and these things make it so we're going to put you on the council, but we're not going to make you a master.
Right.
And that gives it more context, and you can flesh out Anakin's character a bit. Here he is trying to be the war hero, trying to protect as many people as he can, trying to protect whatever, and he's being criticized for that rather than throwing a "it's not fair" kind of,
Right.
because he can understand, because Anakin's not an idiot. He can understand all of these things and still be mad because he did what he needed to do to keep the Republic alive, and the Jedi Council are being dismissive of his efforts and calling him out for doing those things. But, you know, and in their mind, they can say, yeah, you're just, yeah, you're still what, 20 years old? How old is
Right.
he?
I think he would be 23, 24.
23. It's like you're still 23, 24. Yoda's 800 years old. Who knows how old the rest of them are, but like
Mm,
they've all got this seasoning going on. And then there's just this young 23-year-old, and it's like, hey, we just need you to have some more time. And they can say, and we need you to be a Jedi outside of a war
mm,
to understand what being a member of the council and a Jedi Master really means.
right. And, I think it's easy to say what the character should have done to prevent some of these things. And a lot of that would make a lot more sense logically. But I guess at the end of the day, we only have what we have. And George Lucas did the best he could with the limit of the time frame he had, and I guess in the end we've got what we've got.
It's true. We have got what we got, and what we have, and this is something that we need to repeat. So we have 6 amazing movies that George Lucas made
Yes.
that has spawned this entire franchise, and millions of people are in love with this series for good reason. It's just these are things that we think would provide context for the haters out there.
Exactly.
And I think that's one of the main problems people have with the film is that Anakin comes off as whiny, but it's because we don't have this context. Like we said, you have the entire Clone Wars where the full story of what George Lucas had in his mind comes to fruition. And
Right.
he's got, how many hours of content and of stories and of back and forth and characters that he has spearheaded into this. This is how Anakin got from here to here. This is
Right.
how the Republic fell. This is everything. And you just can't put that much into the film. Even if we said, all right, we're going to go 4 hours, you still haven't got enough time to even get a slight bit more context. And so that's why I think just adding little bits here and there give you a lot of room to play with. And that's why when we started, we chose we want the Lord of the Rings extended edition, but with Star Wars, because there's only so much that you can put in, and you can't add more, or not add more, but like with the time frame of just a regular movie, especially in the 90s and 2000s, like those early years, he wouldn't have been able to do a 2.5, 3 hour movie like some other things have done, you know?
Right. The precedent for the 3 hour Avengers Endgame wasn't there yet.
Right.
And the climate, the culture just wouldn't have accepted it. It wouldn't have
Right.
worked. They wouldn't have had as much success as they have now or had until a certain company acquired a certain other company and made three more films that we'll talk about, I'm sure, at some point. But
Yes, yes, we will. But let's end on this, Zach. I think the last 30 minutes of the movie are fantastic.
I couldn't agree more.
The only thing I have and criticize the last few, you know, or to begin that last act, the climax of the first three films. You and I think that the fight between Emperor Palpatine, Darth Sidious, and the four Jedi before he and Mace Windu have their duel could have gone a little different. And really, as you said, the point was to show that Palpatine is just this super fast Viper, amazing force wielding genius of a duelist or whatever. But like the reality is Ian McClellan is an old man and he's a stage actor, and we love him because he does a fantastic job. But that is not his strength. He is
Right,
not young like anyone else in the film, and so you can't do a scene with Anakin and Obi-Wan with him.
right.
So what would you do to improve that and still show that he is this powerful Sith and able to take on four really skilled Jedi at once, but still living in the real world with he is who he is?
I think two things come to mind. Number one is in canon, in Star Wars canon, Palpatine doesn't love to use his lightsaber in the first place, right? And I think you play into that. It's a lot more natural for Ian McDermott to, you know, make hand gestures that translate into force abilities on screen. That's something that he can play into. His strengths are in his facial expressions, in the emotion that he can give to his voice. Um, and I think you take that avenue. The other idea that I've had is there's a an episode of the Clone Wars where Palpatine duels Darth Maul and his brother Savage Opress at the same time, and he dual wields. And I think making Palpatine a dual wielding duelist would play better to Ian McDermott's physical capabilities. You can have him block over here, make a couple of cuts, and show that his strength, similar to how he's manipulative in his dealings with Anakin and with the Council, he can be manipulative, so to speak, as a dual wielding duelist. You can have deception that leads into their demise. So it's not necessarily that he's this viper, but it's that he's a deceptive cobra, so to speak. He's
Right.
able to feint. He's able to, I'm coming over here, but actually this is the one that's going to get you type deal. I think those are, I think those are maneuvers that would be easier for him to execute, and it would keep the realism. How do I want to say it? The problem is you have belief is suspended when you try and show that Ian McDermott is a lightning fast viper, because it's just not the truth, and it's hard to
Right.
translate that into an on screen, to translate that to cinema.
Right.
So those would be my two suggestions. Lean into his force abilities and or use a manipulative, deceptive form of lightsaber combat that utilizes a dual wielding technique.
I think I like that. One of the things that I thought was really cool, and this is going to, I can't remember which series it's in, whether it's um is it the Obi-Wan series where you have the Inquisitor who I can't remember who she is, but there's that scene with her and Darth Vader fighting, and she's trying her best to kill him.
Yes.
He doesn't even draw his lightsaber, and he's
Hmm.
able to block with the Force.
Yep.
I think if you had, granted, did we know that that was possible here versus, but if we could go back and add that in and have like, I don't want to say like this ground pound maneuver, but like if you send this force shockwave that pushes, three of them back, and then he pulls out his lightsaber and blocks one, kills the other, and then all of a sudden he has the second one. Like there are so many things you could do to coordinate that would show off his force abilities, show off that he's powerful, but also, like we said, play into the reality that, you know, Ian McDermott is not a young man.
Right.
So I think that would be the only thing in the last however many minutes that I would change.
Right.
Because then you have uh, you know, Anakin becoming Darth Vader and really committing, I am going to save Padme at all costs. And so he, you know, cuts off Mace Windu's arm. He pledges himself to Darth Sidious. He goes and he kills the younglings. He does, he goes to Mustafar, slaughters all of the people, and you can see Obi-Wan discovering all of this and his heart breaking like you do. And then he goes to Mustafar and has to fight and kill Anakin, even though he knows he can't do it. And that fight between them, and I'm sure you've seen the same interview that I have, but they admit that was all them. No stunt doubles, no
Hmm.
anything. That was them practicing that sequence for years, but hours on end to practice and perfect that fight. And that's just the two of them literally fighting. It's perfect.
It's perfect. One thing that I see people criticize from time to time is that moment in their duel where they're seemingly just flailing their lightsabers around and they're not making contact at all. But for anybody who might be a hater of that, I'd like to shed my opinion on that. The point that's supposed to be brought across is that those two knew each other so intimately that they were predicting each other's moves 3 moves in advance. So they were both predicting this is what he's going to do, but he's going to do that. If I do this, he's going to do this. And they were both, I mean, it was so in sync and they were making so many micro adjustments in the moment that the contact was never made.
Right.
That's what's supposed to be conveyed there is that they know each other and their fighting style perfectly.
Right. And they do. And it's just so heartbreaking, but it is so well done at the
Mm-hmm.
end.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and it's perfect. You have to figure out, how did Darth Vader become more machine than man? How did it happen? It's even more heartbreaking knowing that Obi-Wan didn't want to kill him, didn't want to leave him, couldn't actually pull the trigger and just not murder him, but like kill him there. And so he leaves him hoping that he dies, but he can't be the one to strike the final blow. Then you
Right.
see the lava burn him and damage him, and then the transformation into Darth Vader at the end. That's art.
It is. It is. One commentary I saw recently was George Lucas's masterful storytelling without any dialogue that occurs at the end of each film. At the end of each film, you have the beautiful score, um, composed by what's his name? I can't think of what his name is.
John Williams.
John Williams, yes, John Williams. The beautiful score that he composes, the emotion that's in that music, and then combined with just scenes showing what's happening. You think of excuse me, Padme's funeral going on. You see Darth Vader becoming Darth Vader. You see Obi-Wan handing off Luke to Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. That's some of the best cinema that I can think of, is the culmination of everything that has happened just playing out, just visual and audio images without any dialogue, telling the story without any of that.
Right. I agree. I mean, every film, think of, the end of The Phantom Menace, the end of A New Hope, all of it. Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, Attack of the Clones, they all have that foreshadowing, but resolution at the same time. It's beautiful. It can be sad. And John Williams, throughout the entire film series, has just done a masterful job, right?
It's perfection. It's some of the most iconic music that has ever been composed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's a person in the civilized world who would not recognize the Imperial March,
right?
Or or the opening sequence for that matter. It is so iconic. It is so perfect, and it brings up so much emotion.
It does.
It's just perfect. There's no other way to describe it.
I agree. All right. Well, I think we've kind of exhausted everything that we wanted to talk about. Is there anything else, any final thoughts you have on, Revenge of the Sith specifically, but on this entire 3-part series on the prequels, whatever movies that you want to wrap up and end on?
I think, just to again highlight a common theme from all three of our discussions, is you need to show the carnage that's happening. You need to show why are these villains such a big threat. If you can show that, then so much of the context becomes clear. So much of the motivation becomes clear. And on top of that, the manipulation of Palpatine. It's Vader's story. All 6 films, it's Vader's story. It's the rise and fall of both Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. When you look at it from that perspective, the whole franchise becomes more enriching. But you also have to remember that it's Palpatine's story too. And to show how his role in creating Darth Vader, if you can implement some of those things that we've talked about, show the manipulation, show the carnage that's being created by some of these other villains, the urgency of these films becomes higher. The devious nature of Palpatine becomes more clear, and the plight of the heroes becomes more relatable, becomes more realistic. And showing some of those things, being able to flesh them out, would take it beyond a 10 out of 10 to a 15 out of 10.
I agree. And in my mind, that's the difference between the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Star Wars prequel trilogy is that you have in Lord of the Rings this dark um villain presence. You
Right.
have, the Black Riders, you have Sauron, you have uh Saruman, you have all of these things going on that cause you to really feel what is happening and a little bit of a darker vibe. And if you added just not that I'm saying we want to make them super dark films, but if you had just a little tint more darkness in there, then it makes it all seem more urgent and, you know, makes the emotional payoff that much more satisfying because you see how it goes.
Right.
And so I think that's exactly right. And then, my final thought again is you and I love these films.
Right.
We are fans. We will quote these movies, love these movies forever. We want all the Star Wars games and things. This is our idea, like you said, to take them from a 10 in our minds, 10 out of 10 to a 15 out of 10. All right, there's one other thing before we end that I wanted to bring up, and that was Padme's death at the end of the movie. Um, we kind of imply or that she just loses the will to live, that her, it's not you know, Anakin force chokes her and she kind of loses the will to live. He takes her to the brink, but he knows he didn't kill her and could still feel the life in her, like he says. But like, what are your thoughts on her death specifically? Because I've never really liked you know, I just don't want to live anymore. I'm, you know, heartbroken or whatever. Like in my mind, a woman with two kids, twins, would at least want to fight and make sure her kids are okay.
I think now you can go into a whole discussion about mental health, and those challenges are real. Um, and we'll leave that on the table. But in this context, in my mind, you're meant to believe. Well, Palpatine tells Vader that Vader killed her. The droid that's delivering the babies tells Obi-Wan that she dies of a broken heart. I never liked either of those two. The like I mentioned earlier, the whole point of this series, of the entire Star Wars series, is the rise and fall of Darth Vader and the rise and fall of Anakin Skywalker. At the end, he is redeemed, and he slaughtered younglings. That's a hard thing to come back from. I don't want to put that he killed his wife on top of that. That's just another hurdle that has to be overcome, and I don't like that. I don't think it makes sense. So what's always made sense to me, and this isn't canon or anything except in my own head, but there was one thing left after Darth Vader became the machine, the man behind the mask. There was one thing left tying him to the light side, and that was Padme. And later we find out that no, he actually has kids, and that's what brings him back. That was his tie. But to Palpatine's knowledge and to Anakin's knowledge, there was only one thing tying him back to the side of the light, and that was Padme. Darth Vader brings her to the brink by choking her, but she could have lived. It was Palpatine who severed that last tie. It was the last thing that he needed to do to make Darth Vader's transformation complete, to sever any connection he had to the side of the light, he had to kill Palpatine, or he had to kill Padme. And that to me it's the final manipulation. The final lie that he tells Vader is, no, you killed her, when in actuality, it was him. He did it, and then tells the lie to manipulate Vader to snuff out any last flame of hope or any last chance for redemption, at least until they find out that the son of Skywalker lives.
Right. Now, is that done like force manipulation from afar? Like, I don't know how that happens, but I agree. I like that idea. And I guess maybe we don't even need to explain. We could just say he's the Sith Lord, the master of the galaxy at that point. So, you know, I don't know
In
what your
my
thoughts are.
mind, in my mind, it's a force manipulation from far away. Um, the one of the few things that are good about the sequel trilogy is the force projection that Luke is able to do at the end of The Last Jedi. And it just shows that the force can be manipulated from vast distances. The force can be manipulated. And for Palpatine, that should be no problem. I mean, he's the Dark Lord of the Sith. He's the one that brought the Sith out of obscurity and finally fulfilled their dream to rule the galaxy. That should be no problem for him. And it can be something as simple as um, similar to a force choke, but maybe on a more microscopic level, um, just causing her
Yeah.
to die through the force from a vast distance to manipulate Vader. And, maybe you can say it takes a big toll on him, and that's why he doesn't do that all that often. But I think it's like you said, it's one of those things that doesn't necessarily need to be explained. It's just, it was Palpatine. Palpatine did it.
Right. I agree. I like that idea. I do think that final manipulation is what puts the final nail in Anakin's coffin, so to
Yep.
speak.
Yep.
So I think we're gonna call it right there. We'll uh you know leave it here. We'll stop with these three movies. Um whether it's next week or whether we're gonna take a break with Star Wars and move on to something else, we're not sure. But we are going to keep this theme going of what can we fix? How would we reforge these movies as our, podcast title says? How would we reforge these movies into something to make them even better than the shows and the movies and video games or whatever that we love? So we're going to continue with that. If any of you out there watching want to make a special request, we are more than happy to take those requests, see what we can do to make any film, book, or video game better. Zeke?
That's all from us.
That's all from
We've
us.
we've been Quill and Hammer, and we reforge fiction.
Later.